Do you want to know how I grow super lush Snapdragons reliably every year? In this video, I'm going to cover all things Snapdragon care, from seed starting and growing needs, to spacing, pinching and harvesting, as well as all the other things that I take into account when growing Snapdragons. Sit back and grab a cup of tea or coffee, as there's a lot to dive into, but I'm confident that you will find some useful insights which you will hopefully be able to reference in your own flower growing journey. So let's dive right in. Snapdragons are some of the most appreciated cut flowers. They are very versatile and they complement a lot of different flowers. This flower is used as a spike element in bouquets to give depth as well as movement to the bouquet. Not to mention its unique presentation, which makes people look forward to finding it in bouquets because it evokes nostalgia. It often makes such a bold statement that many treat it as a focal, and people love it even in straight bunches. I will start by going over the different groups Snapdragons fall into, which is something that's often overlooked, but please bear with me as this information is very important for selecting varieties and for planning when to start each variety based on when we want it to flower. Alternatively, this video is divided into chapters, so feel free to skip to the topics that interest you the most. Snaps come in multiple varieties and they are categorized into 4 main groups, and this is based on their response to day length and temperature, which influence when they flower. Group 1 is bred for autumn sowing and late winter or very early spring flowering when temperatures are cool and days are short. Group 2 is great for spring flowering with slightly longer days but still cool temperatures. Group 3 flowers in late spring as it needs more light and moderate temperatures, and finally Group 4, which loves the long days and summer heat and is the last one to bloom. So when choosing a variety, it's important that we know which group it belongs to so that we can choose one based on when we want it to flower. As a side note, as a beginner flower grower, I used to think that all cut flowers benefit from high temperatures and maximum sun exposure, but that's not true. There are lots of cut flowers that thrive in cooler temperatures and actually get stunted growth and even fail to flower during long warm days, which is why knowing the conditions when cut flowers perform best can make a real difference in the quality of our flowers. Okay, so let me give you some examples. Group 1 includes varieties like Costa, Cool and Monaco, and they are ideal for overwintering in unheated tunnels. Group 2 includes varieties like Rocket and Liberty. Group 3 includes Potomac, Madam Butterfly and Apollo. I'm crazy about the Potomacs as they produce very robust flowers. And Group 4 with varieties like Chantilly, which is very popular for its ruffled petals, similar to Madam Butterfly, but the latter has more robust flowers in my experience, but they're both delicious. Although Potomac and Madam Butterfly do not belong to the cooler groups, I have been able to overwinter them undercover in the UK with great success. While they do need to wait for more warmth and longer days to flower, they use this time to continue to grow in height, and I cannot say I'm upset about it. I treat Snapdragons as hardy annuals in the UK, and they can be started in autumn as well as spring. In my case, the autumn sown Snapdragons get really tall and strong. Potomac Dark Orange variety reached almost 200 centimeters in height, which is about 79 inches, and the stem was really thick. I started mine indoors mid-August last year, and I moved them in the unheated greenhouse over winter. They continued to grow over winter, and I transplanted them in the ground during the last week of Feb. They started flowering during the second week of May, putting on a lush display of outright robustness and glamour. It takes autumn sown snaps 9 months to flower, but the experience they provide is out of this world. When it comes to seed starting, I personally don't direct sow a lot of seeds because for me, most of them haven't been germinating reliably straight in the ground. So instead, I prefer to start snap seeds indoors in seed trays. This way, I have a lot more control over the growing conditions and the germination rate is a lot higher. This means there's a lot less seed waste, which is important when you're dealing with expensive specialty seed that comes in low quantities. I surface sow seeds in seed trays under grow lights onto moist seed starting mix. The seeds germinate within 10 to 14 days and they prefer a temperature of 18 to 20 Celsius to germinate, which is about 64 to 68 Fahrenheit. I find that if the seeds haven't germinated within 2 weeks, it's unlikely they'll germinate at all, or the seedlings will be very weak if they do. For best results, I use a humidity dome to make sure moisture is maintained around the seeds until the seeds germinate. This is especially important as the seed is sown onto the surface of the soil, which is making it more prone to drying out. I do need to make sure, however, that the vents of the dome are left open to ensure good airflow. If you've watched my previous videos, you know that I have discussed seed sowing and humidity domes before. But since this is a grow guide kind of video, I'm going into all aspects of care, so please bear with me. Once 50 to 75% of the seeds have germinated, I remove the humidity dome to prevent the seedlings from damping off, and I continue to grow them under lights. After germination, excess humidity can actually harm the seedlings. When they develop their first set of true leaves, I start fertilizing these young seedlings with an organic liquid feed every other week until they are ready to be transplanted outdoors. If the leaves start yellowing and the seedling growth stalls, it's likely that the plant is a little hungry and it's already depleted the soil of its nutrients. Once they have developed 3 sets of true leaves, which takes about 6 weeks, they are mature enough to be pinched. I pinch the top of the Snapdragon just above the second set of true leaves. Let me explain what I mean by true leaves. The first leaves that we see when the seed germinates are actually called cotyledons. And technically they're not leaves, rather they are the 2 halves of the seed itself which feed the embryo. The next set of leaves that develop on the young seedling is what we actually refer to as the first set of true leaves. And so once we pinch the top of the Snapdragon, we can also root that cutting to obtain a new plant for free. After pinching, I allow the plants to stay indoors for another week, and then I gradually introduce them to the outdoor weather conditions for another week, which is a process called hardening off. This allows the plants to gradually adapt to the cold, wind and UV rays, which is meant to minimize transplant shock. But going back to pinching for a moment, the main reason we pinch Snapdragons is to encourage a bushy growth as opposed to keeping a single stem. However, keep in mind that although you will have multiple blooms from a single plant, their stems will be thinner and shorter than the ones you leave alone, so there's a compromise. I personally pinch some of mine so I can increase my number of stems, but I also leave some unpinched so I can enjoy premium stems as well. Doing both has another benefit too, as it allows you to stagger your bloom times. Unpinched stems will flower first, and pinched stems will flower later because pinching slows them down a little as the plant needs a little time to recover. But most importantly, now that the plant sends up multiple stems, the energy is divided between these different stems as opposed to sending it all into one single stem, which is the main reason your flowering time is pushed back. Staggered blooming can also be achieved by sowing Snapdragons in successions. I like to start my first succession the autumn before, sometime in late August or early September, and my second succession is done during the first half of January. You can start a new succession of snaps every 2 to 3 weeks to ensure a continuous supply of flowers. But I would personally plant so that the last succession is not planted out later than the beginning of June, because the temperatures then get too high for the plants to establish properly. So I would start my last succession sometime at the end of April. But please do let me know what your experience growing snaps has been. How late have you been able to push planting seedlings into the ground? Before I transplant my seedlings outdoors, I prep the planting beds by adding a layer of compost on top of the soil. Then I dig holes for each seedling and I add a sprinkling of fish, blood and bone fertilizer to the bottom of each hole, which will gradually release nutrients for my plants. Once all of my seedlings are in the ground, I cover them with Horton over netting to provide protection against birds who like to pull the seedlings out of the ground in search of worms and bugs, but also to provide a support structure for the stems for when the snaps grow tall and top-heavy, and protect against damage from storms and strong winds. When it comes to spacing, you can be tempted to cram them in, especially if you have limited space available, but this comes at a cost to the health of your snaps. Typically, the more space you can provide a plant, the healthier it will grow, but practically, it is best to plant Snapdragons at 6 to 10 inch spacing, which is 15 to 25 centimeters. I tend to aim for 6 inch spacing, but I keep on top of cutting stems so that I can improve airflow among the remaining stems in order to prevent rust from affecting my snaps, which is a fungal issue that's common with Snapdragons, and it is often associated with poor ventilation. Snaps are cut and come again flowers, which means that the more you cut from them, the more stems they send up. So after your first flush is spent, you can expect more blooms from the same plants. Personally, if I see any rust developing on the leaves after harvesting the first flush, I pull everything out to avoid an infestation. perfect picking stage for the longest vase life is when 1/3 to half of the florets on the stem have opened. They will continue to open in the vase after cutting, and they will last for at least 7 days. They can also be stored in a cooler or a fridge for a few days to preserve and postpone flowering, which is especially useful if there's a heat wave that makes all of your flowers bloom at once, or you don't have the time to work with those flowers when they're in their prime. If you do miss the harvest window, the pollinators will thank you. Snapdragons are a favorite among pollinators, and attracting these insects into your planting beds is a great thing you can do for your ecosystem. Plus, you get to enjoy hours of watching bumblebees dip in and out of those florets. You won't get anything else done around the house. You have been warned. Snapdragons have a characteristic called negative geotropism, which simply means that the plant orients its growth against gravity. This is very relevant when picking and storing snapdragons, and we want to make sure that we place them in buckets vertically and that they are wrapped in somewhat tight bunches to help keep those stems straight. If the snaps are placed in buckets at an angle, resting on the rim of the bucket, you will find that after a few hours, their tips will have curved upward to revert to their vertical orientation, and you end up with crooked stems. The same thing can happen to snaps that get knocked down by winds and storms, which is why netting is so important. Snaps can self-seed if not dead-headed. However, they can cross-pollinate due to such intense pollinator activity. Especially if you're growing hybrids, the offspring may not be true to the mother plant. If you're aiming for consistency in flower characteristics, allowing snapdragons to self-seed is unlikely to produce reliable results. There is more than a single approach to growing snapdragons, and different techniques can work for different people depending on their individual circumstances. Things like climate, soil type, or prevalence of pests in our regions can all influence the performance of our plants, and we have to experiment in order to find out what works best for us, as there's no replacement for trial and error. But I hope you found value in referencing my shared experience, and I'd be thrilled for you to grow amazing snapdragons of your own. If you've enjoyed this video, then you may also like my latest video where I discuss 6 of the flowers that I loved growing so far this year, and you'll find the link to this video in the description below. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions about growing snapdragons, what your experience has been growing snapdragons, or any other comments whatsoever. I'd love to hear from you. Please subscribe for more cut flower content and share this video with other flower loving friends of yours. I'll see you soon.